Shabbat Shalom. And am I good if I come out here too? I know we've got people joining us on the live stream. I wouldn't want them not to be able to see, but I also want to be closer to you all. Shabbat Shalom. So as Isaac mentioned, tonight is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, the month that Passover falls in. And as a result of it being Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the month that Passover falls in, we are, as of sunset tonight, officially in the Passover season, at least according to the Jewish calendar. But of course, there are unofficial ways that we might know that it's Passover, and we've already long since reached those mile markers. One way that at least I have known that it's Passover season is that I've now, on more than 2 occasions, bumped into congregants at Stop and Shop with shopping carts just full to the brim with supplies of things they need for their Passover Seders. I saw one congregant, no joke, she must have had like 40 2-liter bottles of Coke with those little yellow lids, the ones that are kosher for Passover. That's how I know that Passover is upon us, is when I start seeing all of our good people from WRT at Stop and Shop buying their Passover foods, which I would just add, it seems like Stop and Shop has Hamantashen in season all year round, except for at Purim. So if you know anybody at Stop and Shop, help them figure out the Jewish calendar. Hamantashen in December, not right. But Passover is upon us, and in my own family, and I don't know about in yours, we have this tradition that on the first night of our Seder, we have a very sort of common Seder. We go through all the pages of the Haggadah, as you might expect. We don't deviate too much from the script. I mean, it's a thorough and it's an engaging Seder, but it's pretty by the book, so to speak. And then on the second night is when we try to let our creativity out and to try something different. There was one year where the entire second night Seder was just on the passage about the 4 children. Maybe you know that passage. There was a parent who had 4 children, one wise, one rebellious, one simple, and one who didn't know how to ask a question. We had like a 3-hour conversation just on that little parable. So 2 different kinds of Seders. One very common, very by the book, and one a lot more out of the box, a lot more creative, a lot more free form and open to experimentation. And it's exactly this contrast that I want to explore together tonight. So Joni has some handouts that I'm going to ask her to pass around now. And as they're coming around, I'll kill time by saying that the conversation we're about to have is based on an essay by a scholar whose last name is Arno. I can't think of his first name right now. Maybe it's Ron. So if you really like what it is that we're talking about, then all the credit to Ron Arno. If you really dislike what we're talking about now, then it probably has everything to do with my delivery of it. So positive credit to Ron Arno, bad blame to me. That'll be enough while the sheets are coming around. David Arno. David is his first name. So while these sheets are coming, you'll see that the title of the handout, at least, is Curiosity, Creativity, and Freedom. We're going to get into those themes. But if you're interested in finding the essay that David Arno originally wrote on these themes, you can look at the back side of the page. The very last text citation there says David Arno, PhD, and it lists the name of the essay and the book that it comes from, if you're interested in reading how he would have put it were he here tonight. So this is Curiosity, Creativity, and Freedom. Let's start with the following. The Passover Seder that we all have known to hopefully love and enjoy was not originally a part of the Passover holiday. In temple times, when the temple stood, like 2,000 years ago, they didn't have a Passover Seder. The way they observed Passover in temple times was with animal sacrifice. That was how all of our religious customs worked in temple times. I wonder if there's somebody out there who is a confident reader and not afraid of a microphone who would be willing to read for us this short paragraph from Philo of Alexandria, one of like the earliest Jewish historians of all time. Anyone who'd be willing to read Passover when the temple existed off of our source sheets? Okay, terrific. Thanks so much.
Okay, Passover when the temple existed. And each house is at that time invested with the character and dignity of a temple, the lamb being sacrificed so as to make a suitable feast for the head of household who has provided it and for those who are collected to share in the feast, all being duly purified with holy washing. And those who are to share in the feast come together, not as they do to other entertainments, to gratify their bellies with wine and meat, but to fulfill the heredity custom with prayer and songs of praise.
Should have said hereditary custom. That's a typo on my part. So we can see that in temple times, they didn't have a whole big elaborate Seder the way we do today with like 12 different signposts and 4 required cups of wine. It was essentially a big feast over a sacrificed lamb that was eaten around a small table and accompanied by some psalms. That's how Passover used to look in temple times. But of course, in the year 70 CE, the Romans came and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, and no longer did we have the option of sacrificing a lamb to be our Passover observance. And so our ancestors had to figure out, how do we take this tradition of sacrificing a lamb for Passover and adapt to these new times where there is no temple in which to make sacrifice? And as a general principle, our ancestors decided that if we can't do sacrifice, then we're going to do other things. And one of the things that they instituted in place of sacrifice was prayer. But another very important thing that they instituted, which made them a little different from their proto-Christian neighbors instead of prayer, was study. The early Jesus sect was really into prayer, and the early rabbinic sect was really into study. Is there someone who would be willing to read for us, "Study replaces sacrifice"? This is one sentence. So if you're looking to participate, because you're a joiner, but you're also sort of a shy joiner, then this is your chance right now. Anyone out there? Okay, thanks so much.
If 3 have eaten the same table and have spoken words of Torah, it is as if they have eaten from the table of the omnipresent one, or the sacrificial altar.
And by the way, you don't have to be the mom of someone who is clergy in order to be one of our readers tonight. So far, both of our readers happen to have a daughter who is clergy. You don't have to have a daughter who's clergy in order to read this evening. Okay, our reading here that no longer can we sacrifice animals. We don't have the opportunity anymore. But now we've got this new idea. If 3 people are seated together at a table and sharing a meal, but if they don't just share a meal, if they also have some conversation about Torah, some study, some learning, some good conversation, then it's as if they've eaten not just the food off their own table, it's as if they've eaten off the table of God, God's self. And what's God's table? Well, God's table would mean the sacrificial altar. So this conversation over a meal is like a replacement for what used to happen, the sacrificing of animals. We can see how study is starting to replace sacrifice in the time after the destruction of the temple. Okay, so if we can't sacrifice an animal, instead we're going to have a study meal. And, well, what should we do during this study meal? Not a steady meal, a study meal. There are 2 ancient Jewish books, one called the Tosefta and one called the Mishnah. The names aren't important, at least not for this conversation. And these 2 ancient Jewish books, the Tosefta and the Mishnah, are going to outline what we're going to do at this study meal. The Tosefta very, very slightly predates the Mishnah. So we're first going to read what it is that the Tosefta proposed for this study meal, and then we'll read what, like, 1 generation later, they revised it for in the Mishnah. This is not a terribly good reading part. Like, if you were in the school play and you got assigned to, like, this was your part, that you were going to read this table, then, like, you wouldn't be a happy actor. I'm not going to have us read through these bullet points. I'm just going to point out the following, that from the Tosefta on the left to the Mishnah on the right, there are a couple of revisions. First, the bullet points that are in black are things that are common to both the Tosefta and the Mishnah. The bullet points that are in white are things that are different between them. A Venn diagram might have been a good tool for us here. But most importantly, what I want to point out is notice that in the Tosefta, there are 2 things. First of all, the Tosefta writers have some concern that the children at this study meal might get a little sleepy. They might get a little bored. How we doing over here, Emily and Charlie? We feeling a little sleepy? We feeling a little bored? Possibly. Yeah, Charlie nodded his head yes. I appreciate your honesty, Charlie. The fact that you're even here, Gavi's not here. The fact that you are here, I'm very proud of you. The Tosefta is worried about sleepy kids at this study meal, and the Tosefta doesn't have very good ideas about how to keep kids from getting sleepy. What the Tosefta proposes when it says concern about sleepy children is like steal their matzah. I'm not joking. It actually says in the Tosefta, if the kids are starting to nod off during this study meal, steal their matzah and it'll wake them up. Not all that engaging. One other thing to point out about the Tosefta is that at the very end, after 4 cups of wine and Kiddush and Hallel and the kids getting tired and the matzah and the lettuce and the meal, even after the meal, they're going to have an all-night study session. Okay, I love Jewish study, but I think that after all of that, I'm kind of ready to wrap it up. like it's time to go home already. To put the study session at the very, very end of the meal, maybe not the best plan. And a good thing that then just a generation later, the Tosefta gets revised and becomes a different order of things in the Mishnah. Now looking in the right-hand column of our chart, the Mishnah is not worried about sleepy kids because the Mishnah has a better design in mind for this study meal. And the most important part is that the all-night study session, which had been at the very end in the Tosefta, first of all, gets moved up to before the meal. Easier to pay attention when you're not already kind of sleepy from the tryptophan. Is that a real thing from Turkey? I looked at our doctor to see if is tryptophan a real thing? Doctors. Okay. Yes, it is. Okay, good. Better to do it before the meal. And then second, it takes what formerly had been a study session, studying the laws of the sacrifices, and realizes, okay, not only is it better to do that earlier in the night, even better, let's change the content a little bit. Instead of having a study session about laws of sacrifice, instead they propose, let's tell the story. Let's tell the story of the Exodus, and let's make it really interactive with questions and answers and with midrash. That means legends about the story. Instead of having like cut and dry study session about laws of sacrifice, instead we're going to have this interactive storytelling event that takes place prior to the meal. Pretty good revisions, I'd say, between the Tosefta, then to one generation later, the Mishnah. Both of them trying to figure out what do we do at this study meal, which is replacing temple sacrifice. We all following so far? Okay, terrific, great. Let's turn to the back side of our page where there will be another good acting part for someone. Oh, I would love a question, yeah. It's Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after the meal, which Arno in his book lists as just grace, but Birkat Hamazon is what it really means. The blessing after the meal, which some of us may know from whatever we know it from. Okay, so the Mishnah doesn't just give this little chart with these however many bullet points. It actually lists out like a lot of detail. And I provided one paragraph from the Mishnah that gives, or rather, David Arno provided this paragraph, and I'm just giving it to you from him, that lists out some of the specifics. I wonder if there's someone out there who is a brave reader, someone who like wanted to be the lead role in the High School Musical and who liked to have a long speaking part. You know, I don't even have a good example. Who would read this paragraph for us? Okay, thanks so much, Pam.
The attendants pour the second cup for the Seder leader and hear the children ask questions about the Seder. And if the children do not have enough understanding to ask questions of their own, the Seder leader asks these questions. Why is this night different from all other nights? On all other nights we eat leavened bread and matzah. On this night, only matzah. On all other nights, we eat other vegetables. On this night, bitter herbs. On all other nights, we eat either roasted, stewed, or cooked meat. On this night, the roasted meat of the Paschal lamb. On all other nights, we dip vegetables in a liquid only once. On this night, twice. And according to the ability of the children, the Seder leader teaches them about the Exodus. The Seder leader begins with the Jewish people's disgrace and concludes with their glory. And the leader expounds upon the passage. And father was a wandering Aramean, Deuteronomy 26:5.
Thank you so much. It actually should have said, my father was a wandering Aramean. That's my typo, I'm sure. Okay, 3 things to point out. Actually, maybe 4. First of all, notice that this comes from the Mishnah, so the second revision. And notice that it's from Mishnah chapter 10, like Mishnah 4, meaning this is just one instruction. There's a lot of other instructions about the Seder. This is just one of the instructions. And okay, that was the first thing to point out, that we're just getting a little snippet of the Mishnah's whole list of instructions about how to have a Seder. First thing. Second thing is our footnote. Notice that of the 4 questions, 3 of them may be familiar to us today from our Haggadah, the one about matzah, the one about bitter herbs, and the one about dipping our vegetables. But today, we have a different third question. Our third question in our Haggadah is why on this night do we recline? But the original Mishnah asked a different question about roasting the meat, and we could talk some other time about why it changed from that original text to what we have today. But those are not the most important parts. The 2 things I most want us to notice in this Mishnah text are the following. First of all, notice that it says at the very top, first sentence, here the children ask questions about the Seder. Most important sentence. And if the children do not have enough understanding to ask questions of their own, then the Seder leader will ask the question, why is this night different from all other nights? The Manish Tana Halayla Hazeh, which we spend so much time making sure that our young people know and can sing and hopefully have memorized, and you probably have it memorized too. Manish Tana. You did a good job. We taught you how to do it. You memorized it well. And it was never meant to be something that we just regurgitate from memory. If anything, this text seems to make it seem like it was a backup plan. That the first plan was to say, who's got a question about this night? Who has a question about Passover? Who has a question about spring? Who has a question about the weird stuff we've got on our table here? And only if the assembled family, and it's seemingly the children, couldn't come up with questions of their own, then the Seder leader would say, okay, Manish Tana Halayla Hazeh, and then list the 4 questions. A scripted set of questions was never the point. Curiosity was the point. That's big takeaway from this paragraph number 1. Big takeaway from this, and to prove the point, actually, and to prove that point, my paper. And to prove that point, take a look at the second paragraph here. If the children do not have enough understanding, who would read that one for us? Is there someone who could read the if children do not have enough understanding paragraph? Okay, thanks so much, Mitch.
When Abaye was a child, he attended the Seder of the great sage Rabbi. Abaye saw that they were removing the table from before him, and he said to those removing it, "We have not yet eaten. Why are you taking the table away from us?" Rabbi said to him, "Your question has exempted us from having to ask, why is this night different?"
That's the Talmud giving us just like a little illustration of the fact that we actually have interpreted this correctly. That it was indeed the case that the point was to ask a question, and only if you couldn't ask your own question would we then say Manish Tana. In this case, someone who would later grow up to be a great sage, a fellow named Abaye, asked a question of, hey, why are you taking the table away? And the Seder leader said, good question, Abaye. Now we don't have to ask the 4 questions because your question filled in for that. That was the whole point in the first place. Okay, that's major takeaway from the top paragraph number 1. There's one other important takeaway from the top paragraph. Notice that it says, near the bottom of the paragraph, 4 lines, a second line from the bottom. And the leader expounds upon the passage, my father was a wandering Aramean. It doesn't say the leader reads very dryly from the Haggadah the story of the Exodus. It doesn't say the leader pulls out the Torah scroll and reads from Exodus chapter 1 all the way to Exodus chapter 15, every single letter and word. It says that the leader should expound upon the story. And the Hebrew word for expound is doresh, which might be familiar, like a midrash. Remember a couple of minutes ago, Isaac shared with us a midrash about wait a minute, how did they have musical instruments in the first place? Oh, I know, they must have had this deep faith that someday they'd be free. And so they made musical instruments and they brought them with them. That's the kind of storytelling that the writers of the Mishnah had in mind. Not dryly reading from top to bottom, but telling the story of the Exodus full of embellishments and full of expoundings and full of legends and, oh, I learned this thing from my rabbi, and oh, I read this thing on myjewishlearning.com and whatever, and maybe showing like a Bim Bam video, whatever you can do to expound upon the story, to make it fresh and full of new creativity and meaning. And just to, again, prove our point, we can look at the third text on the back side of the sheet. The time of the writing of the Mishnah, the rabbis were very worried about this. They were worried that if we wrote everything down into a prayer book, that it would get stale really fast. And there's this famous line from Rabbi Eliezer where he says, one who makes his prayer fixed has not made a genuine supplication. If you show up to services, according to Rabbi Eliezer, and all you do is read the words in the book, you didn't do it right. You're supposed to come and pray from the heart and have something that comes out fresh. Same concept that he's trying to express there, or that they, rather, are trying to express there in the top paragraph. Don't just tell the story. Expound upon the story. Okay, so where does this leave us? Well, David Arno, who inspired this conversation, put it best, and he put it well in his essay, which again I recommend to you. And I'll just read this part myself. He says, Egypt, where we were enslaved, Egypt was about productivity, not creativity. The freedom with which we tell the Passover story mirrors our liberation from Egypt. In the creativity we bring to this task, we imitate God, who is the ultimate free creator. I think what David Arno is trying to help us understand, and something that our ancestors who came up with this ritual in the first place really deeply knew, is that the Seder is a thing where the form is the content. We don't tell the story slavishly. We're supposed to tell the story freely. We're supposed to have it full of curiosity, full of creativity. The conversation itself is an expression of our freedom. And so I hope this year that maybe all of us can try to find that balance between what we do in my family, where one night is very traditional and scripted, and in a good way helps us to really understand and know all the parts of the Haggadah. I mean, if we don't read the passage of the 4 children, then we never knew it in the first place. And maybe also have the time, once we've gotten that material really under our belts, and even before we've gotten it under our belts, find ways in which to have our Seders full of creativity and curiosity. That's what being free is all about. Shabbat Shalom.